Welcome to 4.0 to Pro, the pickleball podcast that focuses on a single shot, tip, or strategy to improve your pickleball game with every single pocket-sized episode. Our goal is to make you better on the court every time you hear our voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of 4.0 to Pro, your pocket-sized pickleball podcast, where we teach you a single shot of strategy every single episode. I'm Michael O'Neill here in sunny Long Beach, California, joined by one Mircea. Where are you there in Aspen, Colorado? What's going on, dude?
Hello, sir. I'm just enjoying beautiful Colorado right now. We had a little bit of rain, unfortunately, so kind of rained out the afternoon a bit, but now it's cleared up and it's beautiful out here. Everything feels crisp and light. I was just going to say, airy.
The crisp mountain air.
Yep, that's how it feels. Very crispy.
Yeah, I mean, I used to live at 7,300 feet in Colorado, and just waking up and opening that door and feeling how, like, you just feel like you're getting the freshest oxygen available on the planet at that point.
Yeah, and you just walk outside and you feel like you need to take a deep breath and inhale the morning. Part of it is because there's a little bit less oxygen, obviously, but it's nice. It's beautiful, and it's a lovely place to spend the summer, where I'm going to be the bulk of the summer. So very fortunate to be out here.
Your trip is actually what inspired the concept of this particular show, which is reacting to the adverse conditions we get playing pickleball. Because the last time I was at altitude, I went to Denver from here in Long Beach. So I'm sea level here, go to Denver. It's a mile high, famously. And it's shocking how much further and faster the ball travels at altitude. Like, I had a very difficult time keeping my drives in, and even more so keeping my serves in. I felt like I had to serve at 20% to keep them in. So I wanted to ask you first and foremost, before we dug into the show and kind of the specifics around not only altitude, but playing with a lot of humidity, playing with a lot of wind, playing with if you're going indoors versus outdoors, or playing when it's really cold or really hot, and how that can affect the game. I'm curious, like, you just got to Aspen. First and foremost, have you noticed how wacky it is compared to your version of sea level in Boca? And what are some of the steps that you take initially just to make sure that you're able to be consistent on the pickleball court?
I can definitely tell you it's different. The interesting thing that you're talking about is that you, as most people know, you come from California, so you were going from California to Denver. And in my mind, that's not quite as big of an adjustment as coming from Florida, because from Florida, it's not only at sea level, but it's also a much higher humidity.
Right.
So the humidity makes the air more dense. The balls don't travel quite as quickly. There's less drag. Imagine the difference between running through water and running through air. So right now it feels the ball is going through almost no gravity. So you're
hitting on the moon.
Exactly. It's interesting. I've missed probably 10% of my serves, and normally my serve is very consistent. So in the last couple of days, the ball just feels like it's flying. So I've definitely had to make adjustments.
You mentioned you're hitting about 10% of your serves out, which doesn't usually happen. I also found that my dinks, you don't really do a topspin two-y dink. You have more of a slice dink in general. But are you finding that you're having to dial in your targets a little bit? And you're somewhat famous for saying, let's reduce the width of the court by 10%. Are you dialing that back to 20% on each side now?
A little bit, and also the depth. It's really more the depth because the ball seems to fly. I typically don't speed up cross court to the sides because, as we've talked about in various shows, when you're speeding up to the outside cross court diagonally, you're going to be hitting the ball out. So I typically don't have to dial that in. So it's more the depth of the shots. So I have to stand even further back when I'm initiating my serves, and also have to be really careful about taking backswings on returns. I found it really helpful to almost eliminate my backswing on returns and just use the pace of the serve and follow through and follow the ball. That's really helped quite a bit. That's really the biggest adjustments that I think I've had to make in the last couple of days. The dinking hasn't really required that much in terms of adjustment. I've also been working on a little bit of a topspin one-handed backhand and also occasionally a two-handed backhand roll. So I've been working on that a little bit. When you come to altitude, what are the things that you think about that you really need to adjust for yourself? Because everyone's a little bit different.
For me, I didn't really take a drill session or a warm-up session when I first got there. I just started playing. Consequently, my adjustment was slower than it would have been had I actually just said, you know what, let me schedule like a 2-hour block and just dial in my fundamentals of my shots so that I feel at least comfortable hitting normal shots that I would hit and could rely on. So consequently, I didn't really feel like I could rely on many shots until very close to the end of my stay. You and I talked about this earlier today. Some people just adjust quicker to adverse conditions than others do. I think I'm probably a little slower for it, but at least if I walk in with some sort of game plan, knowing that if I just focus on fundamentals first, if it's just let me get serves in, let me get thirds in, like what's my range of hitting too hard or too soft? Again, this is at altitude. I did find that it took me a little while to dial in how gentle I needed to hit it, because not only was the ball flying further in the air, but the spin I was imparting didn't seem to have the same effect as it does when you're in a denser air. Like it doesn't dip as much as you'd expect it to. I had to change the Z's or the RPMs on the ball to get it to go where I expected it to in my mind. And as we all know, if you're playing with 9 filters in your brain every time you're hitting a ball, you're not playing free. You're really concentrating on every shot. And I didn't feel super cozy until later on in my stay.
I definitely think that drilling and exaggerated drilling, I would say, or expanded drilling is probably more accurate, is definitely the way to go to adjust in a very expeditious fashion. Because when I got out here, we really drilled for about an hour. And the funny thing is, the only thing I didn't really drill is the serve. Did a bunch of dinking, some fast hands, did quite a bit of transition work. And that's usually my typical warm-up pattern or drilling pattern in terms of a practice session, where you start off dinking, then you do some volleys, then you go back and you do transition you're in the transition zone about a third of the way back from the kitchen, then about 2/3 of the way back from the kitchen line. Then you go back and you do drops and drives from the baseline. So we did an exaggerated drilling / warm-up session for about an hour, and we only played after that. And so what I really should have done, like you adeptly pointed out, is also do that with the serve, which I didn't do. So that's one of the things that's taken the longer to dial in, is that length of the serve, because I keep hitting it out. I'm not really hitting it in the net. So I think that's one way to approach it for sure.
So it's interesting about that too is, and this is probably another whole show topic, but think about how many games end on missed returns. And it's almost like we never practice them. That's like a thing that you never practice, is those returns. Anyway, another whole show topic. But the other thing to think about here is, everybody on the same page, or are you the one walking into this disadvantage? Currently, you going to Aspen, you're the one who's got the disadvantage because everybody there is used to the environment you're around. However, if you were in a tournament environment, if this were like a Denver tournament, and there was a bunch of APP pros there and you're all dealing with the same thing, then you've got a little more of an even playing ground, and you can start thinking about how are ways that we can take advantage of this situation that other people might still be struggling with. You know what I mean? I don't have the answer for every single scenario, but let's say it's altitude. You're a pretty fit dude. You focus on staying fit as much as possible. If I'm you, I'm thinking, I'm going to start running these guys around as much as possible. Because I'll tell you what, you guys, if you've never been to Denver, wait till you get to the Denver airport and walk up a flight of stairs. And you go, what on earth is that? Because now I have a quarter of a lung. So if you're able to start running people around on the court, that would be a clear advantage. And or you can think, man, if we extend this thing to 3 games, if you're, let's say, you lose the first game or something, you might have an advantage in the later part of it because people get tired really quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And there were a few pros that came up from Florida just earlier in the day. You could definitely tell that some people were breathing a little bit hard after relatively routine points. So that's definitely a good thing to think about if you have a high level of fitness. One other thing that I would suggest is maybe being a little more aggressive on 4th, 6th, and 8th shots. So when your opponents are in the transition zone, being a little more aggressive, getting it down at their feet, because they're more likely to pop it up. So they have more problems softening those resets and dialing in those resets, because again, the air is less dense. And this, while we're talking about altitude, this also applies. Like when I go to California, I feel it's the same thing almost the same thing as going to a higher altitude because there's hardly any humidity out there. So you still have the same overall effect that you have that reduced air density. So the ball seems to fly a little bit more. And when you combine that with altitude, then, it maximizes that, both of those effects.
Exacerbates. That's what you're going for. I'll give you exacerbates on that.
Exactly.
Well, one thing to think about if you are more of a tournament type player and you're going to different altitudes, because I think Utah is also at high altitude, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely parts of Utah for sure. And when I went to Brigham City to play that tournament for the first time, it was, it definitely felt like everything was just absolutely flying.
It's when it's nice to have a couple of paddles in the quiver. I play with obviously the Carbon True Foam, which if you guys would like one, you can go to carbonpickleball.com, get 10% off by using the promo code 402P at checkout. That's a pro plug right there, Mircea. Yeah. But I might bring my True Foam paddle, but then I might also bring an X, which is the paddle I played with for 2 years before the True Foam, which isn't quite as poppy. And I may even bring the standard non-X paddle because much like you think about golf clubs, you guys, there's 9 irons in your bag. And the reason why there's 9 is because the idea is you keep the exact same swing, but the ball doesn't go quite as far. The irons are designed in a way to make it so you can swing your natural swing, but the ball travels where you want it to. The same could be said for pickleball paddles. If you play with a really poppy paddle and you go to altitude, maybe try your least poppy paddle, and that will allow you to hit out on the ball like you normally would. It just doesn't travel quite as far as it would if you were playing with your regular one.
That's a great point, Michael. And I think that's something that a lot of people should really consider. And this obviously helps if you have different types of paddles that you've played with within the same general category. If, like you said, you have 2 different types of carbon paddles, a newer version and maybe a slightly older version, or if you have one type of paddle, or it can be the exact same brand, exact same model, but perhaps one is more broken in, so it tends to be a little more poppy, and the one that is not as broken in has a little bit softer feel to it. So you might use the newer one, which has a little bit softer feel.
Let's talk about the one that is the most common in pickleball, and it could even happen within 1 day of playing, within 1 hour of playing, which is wind. We are playing with a light ball. It is a wiffle ball. We've been playing with a wiffle ball since we were little kids. It is very affected by wind. We've seen pro matches where these people that are the literal best in the world look silly because the ball is dropping quicker than they expect it to, or it's changing direction before they hit it. They're whiffing on overheads. We've all been there. So it's nothing to be embarrassed about, but I do think it's something that we need to consider as a pickleball player and as a higher level player that's playing 4.0 to pro. We are all dealing with the wind on the same court. So first and foremost, are there advantages that we can get? You're very good at choosing the right side so that if you end up in a game 3 situation, you're facing the right way. But I'm very curious, Mircea, talk about a little bit of when it starts getting windy and you've got some real wind to deal with. Sometimes it's behind you, sometimes it's in front of you, sometimes it's side to side. What are some of the things you start to do to adapt your game?
The biggest focus, number 1, 2, and 3 should be the same, and that should be footwork. You want to be on the balls of your feet. You want to feel your toes. You do not want to be on your heels because since the ball is so easily manipulated by the wind, you might think you're about to hit a shot in one spot and then it moves quickly to a different spot. And the only way you can adjust properly is really to shuffle your feet, take those little steps and adjust your positioning. Because if you are just reaching or with your torso and just bending or bending laterally or just reaching out with your arm alone, you're not going to have that stability that we need and we always emphasize on the show. So the biggest thing that I want you to think about is really moving those feet, shuffling the feet, the split steps, and trying to get in the appropriate position. Number 2 is you might want to think about adding a little bit more spin to the ball. And depending on which side you are, let's just say you're against the wind, obviously you're going to want to give the ball a little bit more oomph. You want to take maybe a little bit more of a backswing, a little more of a follow through. And you can also brush up against the ball a little bit more to generate some more spin while also elevating the apex of the ball a little bit more because you know the wind is going to bring it down. So you can adjust that aspect of it, how high you're hitting the ball, so you get a little bit more of a margin.
Yeah, and we have spots. I go to Los Cab in Fountain Valley. It's basically Southern California, Orange County. And around, I don't know, 2:00, it seems like every day we start getting really windy for a couple of hours. It's just whatever it is. It's coming off the ocean. But there's a particular set of courts within Los Cab that are kind of located at the other side of, like, between two buildings.
Yeah.
So the wind comes between the buildings and then fires out onto these like 4 to 6 courts.
I think those are the courts we were playing on too.
They were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on one side, the wind redirects a little bit and you get this diagonal wind that's basically coming from the left side of one court to the left side of the other court. So it's the left side players dealing with it. So with the wind behind you, that left side player can just lean into a serve and hit a diagonal serve that comes in 200 miles an hour because the wind's just behind it. So you got to be a little careful not to hit it out. But if you hit it in, it's pretty tough to fish out that return when you're buried in that corner. But if you are buried in that corner, let's say you guys are serving, it's now time for your third. If you're someone who loves that cornhole style, like I'm going to hit to the backhand of that left side player on the other side, it just doesn't work from that corner. The wind just stops it. And you hit so many balls directly into the net because the wind, you're going directly against this pretty harsh wind. So consequently, you're faced with do I put a little more oomph on that shot? Probably not, because it doesn't even, when you're trying to dial that in, it's so hard to find this really narrow range. So the best bet is to drive. The wind is saying, hey, look, if you're on that left side, you're going to have to drive the ball. When you're on the right side, you can still get away with a drop. Yeah, I can still drop it down the middle, and that's okay, because maybe the ball's shifting to the left a little bit. It might work out in my advantage. But when you're on that left side player in that corner in particular, you got to drive the ball. So you've got to consider a shot change compared to something you might normally do in your life because of the conditions of the court.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question. When you are playing and you get to decide which end you choose, and what you want to do is obviously end on the most preferential side. Hypothetically, if you go 3 games, you want to think about where you're going to end up on the last half of the game. So where you end up on the very last part of the game. Would you like to end against the wind, or would you like to end with the wind? I
would like to end against the wind, but personally, because that allows me to quote unquote hit out on the ball without having to worry about it quite as much. So I still have my full arsenal. Whereas and this is just my own logic and you can argue with it, but if it's behind me, I feel like my mental math has to be so accurate with my drops and with my drives. Otherwise, if I hit a drive, it's going to go out unless I hit it to a very particular spot. And if I hit a drop, it could drift so far into their paddles that I feel like I would be at a big disadvantage. So that's my personal preference. It's probably the opposite of what the pros choose, but that's what I think.
I don't think so. I think it also depends on a lot of other factors. Sometimes you have these other conditions like that we're going to talk about, whether it's cold or whether it's hot, and whether it's really sunny or you have some glare, and perhaps there's some sightline issues on one side or the other. Another thing that sometimes comes into play is when the tournament you're at has banners on one side and the banners happen to be white and you can't see the ball on one side because of the white banner. So there's other factors. Generally speaking, what I like to do is I would like to end just like you against the wind for some of the reasons that you said. And also because when you are with the wind, when the wind is at your back and someone speeds up and you counter, it is difficult to keep those counters in. It's also difficult to reset. It's difficult to drop because the drops are floating a little bit higher because you have the wind and it's a little unpredictable. So I almost always would choose to end against the wind. It's such a personal preference, but there's a bunch of reasons that I agree with you that I would like to end playing into the wind.
Assuming we have more of a diagonal or crosswind, the thing I think about there, Mircea, is that I'm going to try to add more margin to the shot. It's almost like a field goal kicker in the NFL. If the wind's going that way, they're going to have to, let's say it's going left, they're going to have to kick it to the left to get it to go through the uprights. So it almost makes, let's say it's left, I'm on the side where it's left. We've got to start thinking, man, 20% of that court on the right side is a no-fly zone. especially if it's a drive, or especially if I'm hitting the ball diagonally somehow. If I'm hitting a drive and I'm on the left-hand side going through the middle, I got to be really careful that I don't hit that ball wide, because the wind's just drifting it. And a lob is almost a complete, like, no way when the wind is behind you like that. You've got to hit it so perfectly to even keep it in the court, versus when it's against you, you can just fire it up and, it's going to land in the court. So I generally try to take your rule of that 10% margin, and very often it ends up flipping the 10% on each side to one side being 20% versus both sides being 10%.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to think about it. One additional thing that might help is, if you can, just prior to match, especially if this is a tournament, if you can pick out a target. Let's say you have a lefty that you're playing against, and the lefty is on the right-hand side, and they have a relatively weak backhand, and that's your primary target. So if the wind is blowing diagonally, say you are on the side where the wind is blowing towards you to your right, if you hit a ball cross court, if you're on the right side, if you hit a ball cross court to that lefty player's backhand, the wind is going to keep it in.
Right.
So you might choose to end up on that side because your target is that lefty's backhand. So that's another way you can think about it if you happen to know your opponents before the match.
Yeah, sometimes when you have the wind against you, by the way, and you somehow find your range and get those drops nice, man, the other team drills them into the net all the time because the ball is shorter than they have set their feet and the timing for, and they're leaning a little forward, and it just plops it in the net over and over again. And I only know that because I've been the one that's hit it into the net over and over again.
Yeah. One additional wrinkle to this is singles versus doubles. Now, in singles, you might want to end up on the side with your wind at your back a little bit because you gain a little more on your serves and maybe you get some shorter returns. And so your opponent may also have a difficult time driving into the ball on the other side. So that's something you might want to consider as well, whether it's singles versus doubles.
On that note, I was going to mention this a little later in the show, but this is a good segue to it. If I were playing singles and the wind was either to my back, or in front of me, I would definitely have two different paddles for that set of games. I would have one when the wind's against me. I'd probably have one that was pretty severely weighted, and I would really have it be a bit of a war hammer. And the other one, I would have maybe some weight on the throat, if anything, because I would want to keep the ball in, but really want to keep it spinny so it will drop as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. I was going to bring that up also a little bit later when we were talking about the temperature differences. But one of the things you can do is add the weight to the top of the head of the paddle to increase that plow through and get a little bit more power and pop behind the ball. And that's one of the ways you can weight it. And you can have the same exact paddle, same exact brand, same exact model, and then change the correct characteristics a little bit by doing the lead weighting, which honestly we should really have a show about, don't you think?
I think, yeah, that sounds good. Just this show in and of itself, thinking about some of these wind conditions makes me think, oh man, I probably should have a paddle weighted totally differently just in case we get that back forward thing anyway, which I don't.
Yeah, one additional thing that I should have mentioned in the altitude and the no humidity section, but it applies to the wind as well. If the wind is at your back or you're in a setting where there's high altitude, no humidity, one of the things you can do is choke up on the paddle. So the more you choke up on it, the more it deadens the response of the ball off the paddle. And what's helped me tremendously out here to be able to really hit through my serves with my normal motion is to choke up on the paddle. If I keep my usual grip, which is more towards the base, then I feel like I'm just guiding the ball or I'm not able to swing fully through my service motion. So what's helped a lot is to choke up on the paddle a little bit. And that can help also when you're with the wind and the wind is at your back. And it can also help with dinking and resets. If you choke up on the paddle a little bit more, you get to feel the ball a little bit better on your paddle, and it limits the poppiness, if you will, of the paddle.
That makes tons of sense. Yeah, I love that. Folks, you've heard us now for really almost the last 2 months talking about the necessity of warming up before you get on the pickleball court. And I'll tell you, we just had our camp in Florida this last weekend. It was fantastic. Thanks for everyone to come out. And we had a blast with them. So many of the campers already had the Yobo Backpack Plus. They were members. They were ready to go. They were getting warmed up. They understood the reasoning behind just spending a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a ton. It's 5 to 10 minutes of warming up. Mircea and I both do the first half of it in our car by using that lovely percussion gun, getting our legs loose a little bit, getting our arm loose a little bit. Then I use the activation ball to get the muscles in my forearm. If anybody's ever experienced tennis elbow, very often it's because you just start playing and you haven't warmed your arm up enough. And that's what all these different pieces of the kit do. Mircea, you've been a card-carrying member. In fact, you were the connect for Yobo because you pay so much attention to your fitness, you pay so much attention to your body, which is why you keep winning all these gold medals. Talk a little bit about like how important Yobo has been for you and just warming up every single time you step on the pickleball court.
It's really been a game changer in terms of how I'm able to perform and recover and, knock on wood, limit injuries and basically diminish your injury risk. Just a horrible, injured, and sick person. You just do not want to be around me because I just love being active. Every day I do something active, and it's most often pickleball or going to the gym, and sometimes I do some other things. I actually started playing padel for the first time yesterday, and that was awesome. But if you cannot perform to the best of your ability, it's just things just aren't as fun. So it's really critical to maintain that routine. And this Backpack Plus gives you all the tools you need to have a relatively quick warm up. So you don't need to spend 2 hours warming up, which no one wants to do, but you can spend 5 to 10 minutes using the bands, using the activation ball. You can, like you said, do things on the way to your matches to warm up with the therapeutic massage gun. So there's just gives you everything you need right there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of efficiency. I like to, if I'm sitting in traffic, I might as well get something going while I'm doing it and warm my legs up, that kind of thing. So you guys right now can get your Backpack Plus. It comes with literally everything you need to warm your body up to play pickleball. It comes in this great little mesh bag with all the different tools. You just stuff it in your regular pickleball bag. You get to the courts, you're able to stretch and do some things you weren't able to do in the car. But by the time you get on the court and start your dinking routine, start your warm-up playing routine, you feel good. Your blood's been flowing. It feels really good. You guys can get that Backpack Plus by going to 402p.com/warmup. 402p.com/warmup. It gets you the Yobo Backpack Plus, and you won't regret it. It's a really great piece of kit. Literally, a great piece of kit, as the Brits would say. Mircea, you have a lot of experience in our next subject, which is, let's say, I'll paint a scenario for you. Let's say that you're someone who relies on their lob, right? You've got a really great offensive lob. You're dinking, you're able to fire it over, completely change the complexion of the point that you're in. But now you're playing in a tournament that's indoors and the lights are a little lower than what you're used to, and your lob's hitting the lights. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. I need to adapt to my environment. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to address here. If you don't play indoors all the time, you might need to change some motion. I had to change my motion on my serve because it just felt very different. Even here, in the same altitude, same exact conditions, but outside versus inside felt different. The ball traveled a little bit differently. So I had to adjust my serve to it. You have to do this all the time, Mircea, the outdoor to indoor type adjustments, and would love to hear a bit about some of the things you think about when you're switching to these indoor courts.
It depends on the court, but it just generally feels when you're indoors that the ball is just flying. And part of it might be the sound, the acoustics, that you just have a louder pop to the ball. But it just really feels like the ball is just traveling harder and faster. The
More
other thing
accurately.
Yeah, and exactly, more accurately because it's not affected by the wind. And I think that's part of the reason that it becomes more of what I call a dry fest. Whenever we play the National Pickleball League matches, it seems like people just feel much more comfortable driving. And since the ball seems to travel a little bit faster, then people get jammed a little bit more. So often people are driving, and it definitely takes an adjustment. And it's one of the things that you should drill when you first start going into an indoor facility. It really is helpful to have someone drill a bunch of balls from the baseline and also from the transition zone at you when you're at the kitchen, so you get used to it. We haven't really talked about this that much, but I don't know about you, but I've really been very conscious about wearing eye protection. When I play a tournament, and I wasn't doing it as much religiously when I was playing rec games, but now when I play rec games and when I'm playing a tournament, I always have some sort of eye protection. So sunglasses, more traditional sunglasses with lenses when I'm outside, and in the indoors, been using the Dink glasses, which are just great, and the clear lenses. So I really think that's something that people should be doing in general, not just for indoor conditions, but it does help to have glasses with high contrast lenses indoors. Have you tried any of those, Michael?
I have, yeah. In fact, all the carbon glasses have these auto darkening lenses, but they also come with a clear, and they come with a yellow, and then they come with a polarized version for outside. And I think it's worth experimenting and interchanging the lenses that might work for you and the conditions you might face. Obviously outdoors as well, like you just said, but sometimes I have a little bit, for some reason, harder time seeing indoors than I do outdoors. And very often, if there's some sort of, like we were just at the fort, and there was like a closed side of the covered area that we were in, and that was very easy to see. But if you were looking towards the open side, there was such a glare coming from that side that if that ball got to that point, it was very difficult to see. And I was regretting that I had forgotten to bring my glasses in my travel bag. And I really would have liked my high contrast lenses for that spot. But it's the kind of things you have to adjust to and be ready for anytime on the court.
Yeah. And when you go to these different indoor venues, they obviously have different types of lighting and different types of paint on the walls, or they might have, I was actually, one place we played at had a Dali-esque mural on the wall, and it was really tough to pick up the ball in hands battles when you were facing that multicolored wall. One of the other courts at that same facility, when you were facing one side, they had a glass door on one side. And when the afternoon sun went through that glass door, it was almost impossible to return to that side because you completely lost the ball. So when you go to an indoor venue, you may, especially if you're playing a tournament, you really need to consider which side has the best sight lines. So you want to end up on the better side. So that's really one thing that's key. But like we've talked about with these other conditions, you want to prep as much as you can. So you want to warm up, you want to drill, you want to get acclimated to your environment as much as you can, and keep that in mind when you're devising strategy. When the opponents were facing the mural on the wall behind me, I felt more comfortable speeding up, and I would speed up much more off the bounce because I knew that they would have some trouble seeing it. So that's something that you can implement in your strategy to take advantage of that.
You're so mean, Mircea.
I know. When you're playing for money, it's a little different than when you're playing for rec games.
Yeah. I'm going to make a suggestion that we've never mentioned once on the show. And sometimes during indoor play, it can get cacophonous out there. Like it just gets so loud. I have a pair of earplugs in my bag that allow me to still hear my partner, but can cut out a lot of that outside noise. And for someone with my super ADD brain, it's very helpful. So your mileage may vary. You can put them as far into your ears as you want to. But if you do have a hard time maintaining focus, if it's super loud or something else is going on, maybe experiment with that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And I haven't done that. It's interesting. A few years ago, someone went out on the court with earbuds, and they were asked to remove them by one of the refs because apparently it was against the rules or something, that as if someone could call you while you're on the court and give you coaching advice during the middle of the match or the middle of the point even. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I've tried that, but I found that it was too isolating for me. Like I've always tried to combat my ADD on the court, and that was one of them. Okay, let me put some focus music on, but I mean, obviously, every show we emphasize communication, and you can't just be completely blocked out from your teammate, which happens all the time, by the way, on the rec courts. I play with people that have earbuds in, and I go, how are we supposed to communicate on court if you're listening to something? It's just not how it's going to work. And of course, you lose. All right, fine. Anyway, the last bucket here, Mircea, is that miscellaneous bucket of things that we might need to adjust to. Could be hot weather, it could be cold weather, it could be sun, anything we've forgotten about so far. And in general, you like to have everything you need in your bag, right? You got to prepare for hot or cold or whatever. And or if you know you're going to an environment that's going to be one or the other, it's worth noting. But can you talk about a little bit about how the ball travels, hot versus cold?
Yeah. And while we're on this topic and we're talking about preparation, which is one of the things we talk about in terms of something you control before the tournament. You really need to check the weather. It sounds like basic, but I've had partners that have shown up at tournaments and they have not checked the weather and are completely ill prepared. Like they don't have the right clothes. It's cold and they don't have enough warm clothing. But I remember even when you play tournaments in Florida, you think, okay, you don't really have to worry about it being cold. I played a couple tournaments in Punta Gorda in January, February, APP tournaments, and it was in the low 40s.
It's cold. A nipple shot in the 40s is something you're going to remember for a couple of days.
Yeah, it was biting cold. I went out and played singles, and I kid you not, I missed 7 returns in that first game. And that's when I learned about choking up on the paddle. So that first game, I lost 11-1. And then I really had to choke up on my paddle to the point where I had my finger on the paddle sort of, we talked about it on another show where Callan Dawson, if you watch him play, he holds the paddle like a ping pong paddle. Yeah. So that's what I had to do in order to deaden the pop of my paddle. So anyway, long story short, you really need to prepare in terms of your clothing. Hydration applies for both, but it's even more important when it's hot and humid in Florida. Warm up. And when it's cold, you really need to warm up. Also, to acclimate to your environment. So go out a little bit earlier. If you're coming from California to Florida, don't come out the morning of the tournament and come out to 90 plus degree weather when it's really humid, and vice versa. Don't go to California flying in the night before. You really need a day minimum, I feel, to basically get acclimated to your environment for a tournament, and ideally 2 days. And you can also use the temperature in your strategy. If you have a really cold day and the ball is hard and the paddle is hard, it's going to be more poppy. So you might want to consider a different paddle, like you mentioned, a softer paddle. You might consider choking up on the paddle. But if you know that your opponent's paddle is poppy, like you're playing against someone with a paddle tech or an engaged, you may take that 4th or 6th shot and be a little more aggressive to get it down at their feet because you know they're going to pop it up, because it's really tough to soften up that ball in a low temperature. Conversely, when you're playing in the heat and you get a softer ball, you need to hit out more. You can generate a little more spin. The ball dips more. You want to basically hit through the ball a little bit more. And one of the other things, a lot of people come to Florida and they're like, oh, I left the paddle and the balls in the car. It seems like a stupid thing, but you really do not leave your paddles or the ball in the car, because it might change the playing characteristics much more quickly than you think.
Yeah, and it'll delaminate sometimes too. Like they're just not used to that. One of the cool things about my carbon bag is that it has an insulated area for the paddles.
Yeah.
For hot and cold, which is really cool.
I love that.
It's funny you mentioned about trying to get there a little early. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday of these NFL players. Very often now, NFL is going to Brazil and they're going to London, and the Steelers are going to Ireland this year. They've got to travel from the United States, and then they're there for just a couple of days, and they got to play this game. Jet lag is real. Like it's a real, actual thing. And these guys were talking about how they'd be going through, they're stretching on the field, and like 4 of the guys would fall asleep on the field. Or this coach that was going through the plays, they're showing videos of the plays, and dude just fell asleep on the thing, and the video's just fast forwarding through the entire thing because they're on their complete opposite schedule. So that thing, look, it was real for me in Florida. It was like, man, when we got up to get going and you're picking me up at 8 o'clock, that 8 o'clock was 5 a.m. my time. That means I was getting up at 4 a.m. I'm like, oh, and so that's very early. If I know I'm going to do that, for instance, last year when I played the APP in New York, I actually set my alarm for whatever it was, like 4 a.m. I think for 4 days before I even went to New York. I just started getting my body used to that time zone.
Yeah,
and I was very productive, by the way, in those parts of the morning. But then I'd be asleep in the afternoon. So to your point, if you're going to go out and invest in go play an APP tournament or whatever, it is worth spending a couple days getting your body acclimated to where you're going to go, because it really matters.
So what do you think about the sun? Like when it's a really bright sunny day, you're fortunate to have a lot of those in California. So do you try to use that to your advantage when you're picking sides, when you got a rec game or a tournament? What do you think?
I don't do it as much as I should. I 100% in a tournament, lobbing into the sun is a fabulous thing to do. I don't do it as much as I could, but I do think about it. If it's like a rec game, and I'll mention, hey, they've got the sun. So I think there's a bit of me playing, I think you and I have talked about this on the show, playing into the spirit of the game on a rec game, where I go, all right, we're just going to throw it up for a lob every single time because that would be,
for sure.
whatever, it'd be silly. But for sure, in a tournament at the right time, absolutely. All about it.
Yeah. Have you heard the term lefties at 11?
Lefties at 11. I have not.
No. I'm very familiar with it because my longtime mixed partner, Julie Johnson, is a lefty, and also my first full-time men's partner in pickleball was Dan Granat, who's also a lefty. So around 11 o'clock, when you're a lefty, with the sun really affects you when you're about to hit an overhead or a high volley. So it's really important that if you're a righty and it gets to be around that time that you think about taking more of those balls. And I'm telling you, it's a thing. It's a thing.
So you're saying that because of the way they're facing, and this is probably Florida 11?
It can be in almost any setting, but around 11 o'clock, the sun is a position on the pickleball court, the way, if they're properly aligned, where it affects the lefty more than the righty.
They got to look right up into it on an overhead, basically. It's like that's the angle of the horizon for them. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
You guys are mean.
I know, man. And I also have noticed that at times when I'm the left side player later in the afternoon, if there's a glare when the sun is down and you're almost looking, because you're looking to your right most of the time, if the sun is in a position late in the afternoon where it can affect you on almost every shot. So that's one thing you also have to consider, the time of day, in addition to being a lefty. So
would that be righties at 5?
I guess it might be.
Yeah.
I guess it might be, depending on the environment. Just one additional tip: definitely do not lob lee waters in Vegas when you have the sun right up above, because that is not a good thing to do.
Well, certainly, worth a YouTube search if you guys have not seen that. Indeed.
You do not want to be on Lee's bad side in that context.
All right, go enjoy your Aspen lifestyle. I don't know if you have furry pickleball shoes to go with your cowboy hat.
I do not have those, and I do not have cowboy-style pickleball shoes. I don't know if those things exist, but they probably do.
You'll make them by the end of the summer. Folks, you've now just listened to another episode of 4.0 to Pro. As always, we love listening to you guys. Thanks for all the feedback at picklehelp.com. Mircea, go enjoy some Aspen, and we'll talk to you next time, sir.
Sounds good, my friend. Take care.
All right, folks. We'll see you next time. Keep on rocking. Enjoy the pickleball courts. See you later.
Thank you for listening to 4.0 to Pro.
All right.
For more tips, find us on Instagram at 4.0 to Pro. If you have a pickleball question, submit it at picklehelp.com. Now, get out there and dominate. But don't forget to have fun.